I thought that the 20s are meant to be a little bit smoother. The fear of like regretting something in the future is kicking in from all angles.
The amount of mixed messages you get, man. I feel like it's just a puzzle to sort out. On one hand, you get the grind culture. Make sure your 20s, you've locked in that when you're at 30s, that you feel set. But then on the other hand, you get travel, adventure, you're only young once.
Like, it's really hard to balance how much you're meant to live your best life compared to how much you're meant to grind. Hello and welcome back to the Brown Playbook. Today, I need to ask you the question.
Go on.
Why is your 20s so confusing?
Bro, so I think just because of the amount of mixed messages you get, man. Like, I feel like it's just a puzzle to sort out. Like, on one hand, you get, the grind culture, like grind, lock in, make sure your 20s are like, you've locked in and you've sorted so that when you're at 30s, like, you feel set.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, you get I feel like you get a lot of like, travel, adventure, you're only young once.
Yeah.
And then you have the opposite, like, like you've got the most freedom because you have the least responsibility. So it's kind of like, fail as much as you want, like fail and learn. But then, I don't know, I feel like I always find it quite like a puzzle to like unpack because those pull at you in like many different directions of life. That's how I feel.
No, I completely agree. I think mixed messages is the best way to explain it. There's so many different things that are happening compared to when you were younger, and maybe even just like the 20s in this generation compared to being in your 20s, like even 30 years ago is very different because everything's so fast paced. I think the key word is balance. Like, it's really hard to balance how much you're meant to live your best life compared to how much you're meant to grind, how much of your money you're meant to invest for your future versus on a holiday to enjoy it now, because what if you regret that? I think that's actually one really good important point, that the fear of like regretting something in the future is kicking in from all angles. Don't you think? It's like, I'm getting better at like finding that balance a lot of the time, but I just know I can see everyone around me is just like so confused as to like what direction they're wanting to go in.
I think
one
that just on that point, I think one thing I struggle with is the difference between urgency, so being so ambitious, being urgent, but then also being like, am I being impatient? Like, I know I'm like young, I still need to learn. We're still not like early to mid 20s, so we need to learn. And then you get those messages being like, no, learn as much as you can. Don't worry about your income, for example, or don't worry about this, that will come. And then the other thing that always gets me is obviously passion v stability. So you get like, people go, oh, well, you have to do something you're passionate about, because someone who's like passionate versus someone who's done it for money or for stability, they always go, well, the one who's done it for passion will always have more willpower. So for you to get up and keep going, the guy who has passion will always have more longevity, and it's like less resistance for them to do it. So then you hear that, but then you're also a bit like, well, you get mixed messages being like, oh, well, by your 30s you need to be settled, and we know how hard it is to be on like the property ladder here. So then you want to prioritize income, for example, and stability. And I just think overall it's pretty hard. I feel like, especially like the how much you adapt in your early 20s. We were talking about this earlier, but from uni and then growing up in that uni, I feel like uni is a great experience to find out who you are, your confidence, your self-esteem, figuring out relationships, friendships, and then you have adapted to that, and then I found it personally quite daunting to go into the real world, and if you've got your applications and you're new to the workforce, I think you're adapting a lot, and there's a lot of different messages, and it's quite hard to unpack really. And then obviously I think comparison is the thief of joy, but then obviously you see people socials, you can't help it, right? And maybe that's just like your ecosystem in terms of someone, I'm sure, will just be like, oh, well, just don't absorb that content. But I feel like it's quite difficult with a lot of people maybe trying to put on socials living their best life, and you naturally behind the phone being like, am I
think that's one thing that makes things so much harder. That like, it's really hard to figure people out a lot of the time now, because you don't know who they are compared to like what they show. And that obviously makes the comparison thing a lot worse, because there's people out there showing that they're living like the best possible life. And even if they're not, right, there must be like a select few who are, but you can assume that majority of people are loving life because you can just look around, right? You can tell that not things aren't just getting easier for the average person. But still, people portraying that they're doing well makes you just automatically feel a bit like you're not doing enough.
Yeah.
And I think that's a feeling that I think your 20s kind of is always that you're not doing enough in one way or another, I think.
And I think that's key, because the feeling is I feel like the feeling is when you see something on Instagram or YouTube, or even if you hear about someone, to be fair, from a person, and you hear like $200K at like 18, you're like, it's that feeling of, oh my God, like, even if I try my very best for a year or 2 years, I still won't be there. You know what I mean? It's rather than, oh my God, if I just work, I'll get there, which is true. But then that's what we were talking about. We've got that pressure of like, oh, if you're 25, 25 and 30s, you should have done it by then. So it's like, am I doing enough fast enough? You know what I'm trying to say? It's true.
And I'm sure this applies to like all types of people, but particularly from like a brand perspective, there's like a checklist of things that need to get done by the time you're 30. And the 30th birthday, particularly for women, is like so deep. It is for men as well, don't get me wrong, but I know that every female, whether it's my sister or even my mum telling me about back in the day, like when they turn 30, it's like panic stations. And you've got to get job, your body, you got to get marriage sorted, you got to get a bunch of other things.
House.
Just like house, of course, like a plan for kid. Like there's so much that needs to be checked off for most families in our culture. And there's that expectation from parents kicks in as well. Which adds like a whole other layer to all these things that you're already trying to balance.
For sure.
It's just very, very confusing.
There's more to that start business. You get all these different things, for example.
Especially now, innit?
We've just been through it, right? Like, do a 9 to 5, but then a lot of people say, oh, you have to start a business to gain wealth. Like a lot of that's taken up on social media, as in like
100%. That messaging is there, and for good reason, because like, I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, there was a certain expectation that if you're in like the top percentile of people that are studying for job, right? If you're not just going to do like a vocation or like a trades kind of task, something you can do from 16, if you do well in exams, you do well at uni, there was a certain like entitlement that people had that a job will land easily and like I'll live like a good life. And I guess to an extent that should be there. But the fact that it's not means that more people have had to start like their own business.
Exactly.
And it's more beneficial if you do that earlier. So now that's like in a lot of people's thinking, because corporate isn't like paying as well, or the corporate life isn't providing the life that you want for yourself for a lot of people. I'm sure that used to be the case before, but I think it is even more so now, just given people aren't getting paid loads more compared to how much costs are rising, that kind of stuff.
Of course,
But it makes the whole thing a lot
I just think that, and then obviously you get a lot of people shouting about moving abroad. So there's a lot to balance, and I feel like, but then it goes both sides, I feel. Like, for example, there's nothing, if a 9 to 5 suits your needs, and you have young kids, and you need security, and you need a balance, and you love your job, and you think they're paying you decently, then it shouldn't just be like, if you're a top corporate exec, for example, at 9 to 5, which I know in your young 20s you're not, but if you work towards that, then you will have a good life in that sense. True. So I feel like there's a lot of messages you get, but then you really have to, because they're quite in your face, you really have to take the time to reflect, delve, and see both sides, if that makes sense. But it's not the easiest. So I feel like, I think just a lot of adapting in your 20s from starting your career to also relationships to friendships. So I think the key thing is why a lot of people find our 20s really confusing, including us, is because you finally start asking questions like, who am I? What do I stand for? How do I feel about this? I feel like a lot of times, like, of course your parents raise you, and then how they parent then goes on to you. That's the environment you're brought up in is how obviously your beliefs are built off. But then you get to that kind of age of early 20s and you start asking the questions, do I believe this just because I've been told it, or does it actually align with me? You know what I mean? And I think it's just certain other things. You start asking me, like, instead of being at uni and being like, oh, this is quite cool, like, oh, this is what other people are doing, you start being a bit more comfortable in yourself and a bit more self-aware. But in it becomes like a lot of, I feel like, decisions and sometimes decision fatigue. You know what I'm trying to say?
Absolutely. I mean, completely. I want to ask you a question though.
Yeah, go on.
So, how different are your 20s going now compared to what you thought they would be, I don't know, 10 years ago? And why?
Bro, I got two answers. I feel like one, I was definitely kind of going with the flow.
Yeah.
Because I'll be honest, for me, obviously, school, going through uni, I knew I was kind of always going to do, but it really hits you, I think, kind of the daunting task of when you leave uni.
Yeah.
And then obviously for me, then obviously you start getting a job and then you start working in London in our case, how that is. And then you realise learn so many things. For example, how people are different at work.
Yeah.
How the environment at work is completely different. You then become a lot more. Yeah, you've just started the workforce, right? So you're learning loads, you're learning about work relationships. But then on the other hand, going back to your question of the expectations and reality, I did think I would just, as you said, kind of just fit into a job and just kind of go there. Yeah. I didn't think I'd be thinking as ahead as I am now.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean. I thought I'd just stick at a job, I'd keep going, I'd work harder, then we'll figure it out. And we'll figure it out. But now, obviously, I think we've graduated at a time, or a couple of years ago, where now there's cost of living, there was Brexit, there was COVID, and then all we hear, which is also another thing a lot of 20-year-olds probably relate to, is that, oh, the grad market's not the same, or the jobs aren't the same. And then you're trying to adapt to all of those things, right? So I think in your 20s in uni, you learn about like self-esteem, confidence, rejection, friendships. Can you hang on to the friendships you have at school, for example, because you're not going in there every day? You learn a lot about that, but then obviously you learn a lot about the workforce. I just think it can be quite overwhelming at sometimes, being real.
No, I agree. I mean, to answer my own question, I thought that the 20s are like meant to be a little bit smoother. I know. Yeah, well, yeah. I thought like, of course, you've got a job to hold down or like a career or whatever. Lots of people do different things, so you've got to be a bit more serious on that front. But you can still have a really good time. And more now, I'm feeling like you have to choose between one or the other. Like not all the time, but on a day to day, I feel like there's a lot less spontaneity given that I chose the grind kind of side. Because I was like, for the last 3 years, I've just been working the same corporate job I've got since leaving uni. And that's meant that, fine, you get like your 25 days per year and like bank holidays, that's all that good stuff. But you really have to like have a lot of time off to remember what you used to be like, in my case. Like when I have like a 2-week holiday, I'm like, oh shit, when I have time on my hands, I do all this stuff. And then I've just stopped like doing a lot of it. Like I didn't play cricket last year. That's not like me. So there's a lot of things like that I'm finding tough to deal with. But at the same time, there are good things. Whilst it's confusing, like I'm definitely in a better place now than I was when I was at uni.
Yeah,
for sure.
So those are the good things, right? Because you have more experience with friendships, relationships. Now you've been in the workforce for a couple of months. Your confidence, your even physique and fitness. You go through a lot of things where I feel like because you've gone through certain hard times. Yeah,
you've got more life experience.
You've got more resilience now, right? So you're like, oh, I can push through this. I can get through this. So definitely in terms of that standpoint, I feel like it's better. I think it's just kind of the expectation on you for the next 5 years is a bit like, oh, am I going fast enough? Especially with what we were talking about earlier, is everything you hear. So, but I think it's good to sit down and talk about it, because I feel like sometimes a lot of people are feeling it, but no one's actually saying it. Going back to you know what I mean?
No, I agree. I think a lot more people are in the same boat than what you see. I think a lot more people are feeling this, like the kind of confusion and the just sort of figuring thing out than people vocalize or like you see on social media, because you don't see that.
Why do you think that is?
Well, firstly, around where we live, a lot of people are staying at home for a much longer time, or like for a much till they are older before they move out, especially like after uni, right?
Yeah. Then what was previously, right?
Yeah.
You stay for a couple.
And
of
I
years.
think a lot of people have their own like checklist in their head, right? So they've got certain things that they wanted to achieve in their 20s. So if they're not like getting all of that done, because obviously it takes a lot longer to achieve your ambitions now. Like you've got to plan a bit longer. So if that's not happening, like people aren't just going to be speaking about it all the time. Do you know what I mean?
Also, to be honest, like they're just going to get judged. So they'll
Yeah,
feel like
yeah,
they'll
of
feel
course.
like they're just going to get
Because
judged.
you're at a
right?
party or something, there's someone else who's checked that thing off.
Yeah.
And yes, comparison is the thief of joy. Yeah,
Exactly.
But comparison is human nature. People can't help it.
Yeah.
So it's going to happen even if no one says anything. Just a look that you'll get because you've not done this one thing that someone else has. Even if they're not trying to judge, like at some stage, you're gonna experience going through that.
Yeah.
You know,
and
because no one can do everything.
And exactly what you said about judging. Technically, yeah, like so is first impressions, right? Like you're naturally just gonna have a first impression of someone.
Agree, yeah.
But that's why I feel like it's quite hard because, for example, say you have taken this advice, right, to be like start your own business, grind in your 20s, but you're building. You know, we both know that when you go to like family motives or you're out somewhere, the first thing people ask is, oh, so what do you do?
What are you
work?
up to now?
And sometimes you can come across a really kind person where you say what you're building, you say what you're passionate about, and they're completely on board.
Yeah.
But other times they may look at you being like,
what do you mean you're doing that?
Why are you doing something different for? And then you just feel a bit
this guy did not pattern up a job the way he wanted. Like,
exactly.
Kind of stuff,
and then you feel a bit like, well, kind of, I'll wait, I'll show you, but I think with that response, you feel like, you hear, it'll come with time, work hard, be consistent, it'll come. But then you feel like no one's giving you that time.
Yeah. No,
you know what
absolutely.
I mean? And then the other thing is, bro, like this comes with time as well. So I'm just gonna say it's like your experiences, whether it comes to your first job or maybe you're not liking it and then pivoting your career, or whether it comes to relationships or friendships. Bro, these lessons, real life lessons, take time to learn. You can't just be like, I pattern this, I pattern that. I feel like that's what people sometimes make it look like. I pattern this dream job, pattern this dream car, pattern this relationship, and I've got the best friendship group, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, whoa, you got this by 22. And it's like, nah. Shit takes time to learn.
No, it's true. And even if some people have checked some of that off, everything comes at a cost to an extent. If you've done all that, something else will suffer. Like no one's got the time to do absolutely everything. And you also don't know what everyone's going through. Someone in their personal life might be showing that off because they're also going through what we're going through and they want to show like their best self on social media. But, you know, they might be going through so much. Like, you know, a third of the country is like eligible for like depression, like as per the NHS or something like that. There's so many stats like that. So if you just think about it from that perspective, like, not very few people are going to have things figured out by 20. I don't even argue to say no one's got it all figured out by 20. Because that means that like, when you're 30, you're not going to look back at anything that you could have improved on. I just don't think that's true for anyone. Yeah.
No, I agree. I agree that it's always a balance. I think that the key is that there's always got to be a balance in terms of having fun, grinding, but there's got to be like a sense of direction.
Yes.
So for example, if you're having that balance, but you're grinding for something and you've got a sense of direction, then it's fine. I think that's kind of the key point. But going to another thing is, for example, like, let's talk about housing, like how expensive it is. But you talked about earlier about, so what would your expectations be reality?
Go on.
But then working at my old job, for example, and then seeing how hard it is to get on a housing ladder, that's why I feel like everyone nowadays is coming up with a side hustle, starting their own business, because you need to find creative other ways to be like, I got told when I was younger that this is stable, this is secure, I'll just keep working my way up. All of a sudden you see grad wages or your wage compared to the housing, and you're like, I need to come up with another idea.
It's like the average person's got to like wait until they're like mid 40s now or something to afford.
And then on top of that, half of that, and I'll put my hand up, they have a Scooby about how to the mortgage payments, taxes. Would you learn about that now because you realise you're into the real world? No, we didn't get that. Wasn't in schools or in unis.
You study business, economics, or whatever the closest subjects to that topic at school, and you're not learning about the internet.
Exactly.
Another thing, actually, you've just sparked a thought.
Oh man.
Yeah. Half the people in this country that get married get divorced.
Yeah, I know.
Imagine how peak that is now with housing the way it is. And like we're talking about our 20s, like, you know, a lot of people commit to a long-term relationship in their 20s.
Of course.
At some stage, right? And like just thinking how like unstable even that could get.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like that's going to cause some serious problems for a lot of people that are going through shit
and
right
even,
now.
Even on a relationship
Yeah,
thing,
of course. That's not even touching on the relationship part and the emotional strain that.
For example, like if your mates are in a relationship and you're not, you could feel behind. Same with like a salary. Same with like a friendship group. Same with, it's like, I feel like there's a lot of that. I think when you leave school and leave uni and there's been like a long enough time gap when you're in your mid to late 20s and you kind of see where everyone is and the different paths they've taken, that's where you can kind of see, or even worse, or not necessarily, but that's where you start comparing, right? Technically.
Yeah.
Right? And then that's hard because that feeling of being behind or not moving fast enough it's funny because then you speak to like 60-year-olds and they always go, oh, like, there's no rush, take your time, you realise you are rushing everything. And it goes back to the mixed messages point at the start, that there's no perfect way. It's like grind and live a little, but it's hard. It's not easy.
No, it's true. I realised like during this convo, I've been obviously talking about my experience, that's fine. But obviously I'm in a relationship now. And whilst you were saying that, I was just thinking things from her perspective. And something that I've noticed by being with her is that she didn't grow up playing sports like we did. And one thing that she's like struggling through in her 20s now is picking up new things and really getting into them. Can you imagine, like, obviously we've all, like, sports for us is like comfort, right?
Yeah.
Like when I go back to my cricket club, I feel like, oh, fine, it's been so long since I've done this.
I'm at peace, man. Like when I'm on the pitch, whatever, I feel like I'm in the best man. Like everything else.
It's been a while since you've been out there.
You
get back on it. But the point is, when you do, you're going to be like buzzing. You're going to be buzzing. You're going to enjoy that. There's a community part. There's a physical part. There's a bunch of stuff in your life that's kind of taken care of, and I'm really appreciative of the fact that I got that when I was growing up. For her, and there's the wider point being, it's so hard for her to like get into a sport now because she didn't like. She feels like, oh, she'll never be as good as the people that did.
Yeah.
Which I'm like, yes, but at the same time, as good as like we might have been at any sport, right? Anyone who doesn't make it as a sports person just does that to help them navigate life, really.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, that's what sport is for me anyway.
It's like a vehicle to learn life lessons, basically.
That, or just get away from life now sometimes.
Yeah.
You know, a Saturday, yes, cricket can get long on a Saturday.
Yeah.
But the fact that I do feel at peace, just even though if I'm out in the field for like 45 overs, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
And I think, I was just thinking about that like, it's hard to like really change yourself as well, even though you might want to try. Like, I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with because they lack time. And I think that's something that you kind of don't prepare for as well.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Straight out.
Obviously when you like contact your mates back in the day, it's like so spontaneous. Now all of a sudden you've got 8 days in a month and you're like, oh bro, I haven't texted you like 2 weeks before, but can you make it? And they're like, nah, sorry, we can't.
I'm trying to host a flipping housewarming, invited 10 people, and then 3 are turning up. Because I didn't give them enough notice. I'm like, I knew you at school. You are not the kind of guy I'm giving you notice for 2, you know what I mean?
But also I think, the last point is also, is the difference between like the family expectations they've set, not even that they've put on you, they've set from the family you've grown up with to now how different times are. Like for example, my dad or mum, when me and my sister, my older sister and me were applying in the workforce, it's so different from what they've known. Like 5 stages, the struggles, the self-doubt, the rejection, so then getting a role. Just those kind of things you have to go through in your early 20s, how your parents see it compared to how your parents see it to kind of your experience is so different.
Absolutely.
And to kind of explain it to them on one hand, so they understand you, but then on the other hand, not to feel resentment or blame that they might not understand it. Because at the end of the day, they have the best interests at heart. They haven't gone through that experience.
Yeah, I think the broader point of what you're like outlining there is that the gap between generations now is going to be like bigger and bigger because of how fast things are moving.
Exactly.
I think that's like kind of the takeaway from what we've kind of spoken about. Yeah, absolutely. And that definitely trickles down to people's relationships with their parents and stuff, because it's so, like, I don't expect them to understand what 20-year-olds are going through now. Because like, how can you? Do you know what I mean? Like, there's no way I can understand what they're going through, and like, I just hear stories and try imagine it.
Of course.
But like, I don't know what it's like to be a kid growing up in the village in India. Like, you know what I mean? I'm never gonna know.
And then the culture shock of coming here, right?
Exactly.
So yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So no, guess that's a good place to end it.
Great place to end it.
Cool.
Yeah, man.
Subscribe.
Yes.